Thank y'all for being here with us. And for those of you who don't have a copy of the book yet, I suggest you do. And in part because, right, my outfit today was inspired by the cover. Like, when people say don't judge a book by a cover, I think in some ways we do, right? And I think this cover is beautiful and amazing. And I just want to say I'm honored to be here with you, Dr. Black, to do this. And so, yeah, we can jump into it.
Following you.
And so I'm gonna try to do this in a way where we don't give away any spoilers, because a beautiful thing about this book is the ride and the journey it takes you on. So I don't want to spoil it for those of us who haven't. And in doing that, I want to name, given that I think this book is a lot of things and does a lot of things, for me, it reads as a Southern queer novel. And to me, it's interesting for me to name it that because so much of it doesn't take place in the South, right? But the way the vowels curl, the way the South weighs on the narrative, and for me as a Southern scholar, first I just want to thank you that, I don't know, this book allowed me to love my memories of growing up in the South differently, to where I think when we tell the story of the South, how queerness, the silences around that, doesn't just displace my queer family members, my queer neighbors, but it also gives us an inaccurate memory of how the South actually takes shape.
Right.
And so, yes, I would just love to start there. Can you tell us about, right, can you just give us maybe just an overview of what you were trying to achieve in the text?
I think, well, first of all, I want to say I'm so grateful that you read this book. Right? When they told me that you were going to be the moderator, I was like, oh no, not this brilliant dude. Man, golly, give me somebody average. You know, give me that's what I was hoping for, but it's not what I got. But I think where I'd start is, I was thinking about the South in this book far more as a notion than as a place.
Yeah.
Right? I was thinking about the ways that the South colors all Black people's lives, even those Black people who are not from the South, right? Like, you cannot be Black in America and have no ties to the South at all, right? Even if that's where granddaddy came from, though you've never been there, there's those ties to the South. And I think that's important because I think it begins to help us answer, what do Black people need? And some of what I think we need is a return to the South, both in terms of memory and in terms of even land space.
Yeah.
You know, there was a day that Black people used to gather in things called like family reunions. But the family reunion back in the day wasn't in LA. You know, it was out in the middle of the field where folks once grew up, you know. And so I was very much concerned with what happens in this book to this young man whose father is Southern in every way, but he isn't. And how does he come to terms with this notion that if he's ever going to be healed, if he's ever going to be right, he's got to plug into the South. He's got to plug in. And of course, his father takes him home. Yeah. And that's when he's like, oh my God, like, who in the world owns 200 acres of land, right? But at one time, that was all over the South.
Yeah.
You know, really, we owned the South, right? And I think that part of Isaac's healing, and certainly part of his identity, is bound up in his introduction to the South.
Yeah. Oh, and this idea of healing, and when I'm reading a text, the term that keeps coming to my mind when I'm thinking about healing is responsibility. Where, and I might even, just because your words are just so beautiful and dope, when Isaac, he's in a therapy session and he's thinking about the ways in which his father didn't love or nurture, right, his queer identity in a way that allowed for him to grow up feeling protected and safe. And so Isaac is in this therapy session, and Isaac says, I'm trying to get free. Well, Isaac, freedom doesn't live behind other people's faults. I just want to hold them accountable, and they should be held accountable. But that's not your freedom, it's theirs. So yes, I would just love just connecting that piece to what you just mentioned about healing.
Yeah. You know, the thing I think that really messed me up about this book, that I don't think I was planning at all, is this notion that though our elders very well may have wounded us, that those wounds are never the explanation of why you are not what you should be and what you want to be. You know, I've always believed that the way, you know, our parents treated us, the way our grandparents treated us, that those wounds, that explains why some people never achieved what they wanted to achieve in life, right? That explains why a person always struggled, right? But maybe it doesn't, right? And maybe it's true. Maybe it's true that no one else's actions committed upon us really ever can limit the direction, right, and the power of our destiny. But it's a good excuse.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know that it's ever really the reason. And that's what the therapist does. And many, you know, I was arguing with this therapist as I was writing this book. I was like, that don't make no sense. Stop it. Right? And the therapist was like, no, like, not like really, seriously. And then I began to think about all these folks historically, like Frederick Douglass, who never really knew, right, some of his parentage. Harriet Tubman, who never knew who her father was, but she still ran.
Yeah.
Right. And I was thinking about, like, why didn't they ever give the excuse of, well, you know, slavery messed me up. So don't hold me responsible for nothing. I need a therapist. You know, and so you know, and how do you come out of slavery and build schools and build institutions and build, you know, and build churches, right? But now, as soon as my mother looks at me the wrong way, you know, I'm so wounded, I'm dysfunctional. You know, and this therapist is saying, "You're clowning, get out of here." You know, and that's what really messed me up because I wanted some excuse. Yeah. You know, and she doesn't afford it.
Yeah. Right, and in the title of the session is right. It's community, and I think part of what I'm getting from it, right, is me thinking, particularly in the U.S. context, I feel we want everything from individual people, where it seems that since Isaac's father couldn't nurture him in all these ways, right, couldn't give Isaac a sense of a queer community, or that your queerness can be loved, that Isaac's father failed him. Do you think Isaac's father failed him, or just talk more about that relationship?
I don't think Isaac's father failed him. In fact, what I think is that Isaac's expectation of his father failed him. I think that. And what I also think is that, like so many of us, I think that Isaac suffers from a whole lot of arrogant entitlement. Right? Because Jacob makes so many sacrifices for Isaac. Yeah. Right? But you know, writing this book has shown me that I'm not sure we've ever really fully conceived of the sacrifices our parents made for us. And I'm not sure it's even possible. Right? I think of, is that me? Is that me? It's not me. Okay, it's not me. I'm not sure we can. Yeah. Right? Remember that incident, you know, where Isaac is playing the piano, right? Isaac tells his father he wants a piano as a kid, and his father buys one. Yeah. Right? And then, of course, Isaac starts learning the piano and blah, 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 blah. But Isaac never really comprehends what it took to buy a piano. Yeah. From a poor country person making $2 an hour, right? What does it mean to have a piano? You know, to us, that's not that deep. But do you know how, I mean, his father was basically a slave. And all of a sudden, the next generation, you got a piano in the house? That's huge, you know? And there are ways that if we really, really stopped, and started counting the ways our parents were sacrificial, we'd be on our knees weeping. Yeah. About the same people who we complained about, right? And I think that's what this book is about in many ways, and that is how your memory tricked you. Yeah. Because in many ways, your memory has pledged allegiance to your own arrogance. Right? And so your memory prioritizes the things that allows you to keep arguing that you didn't get what you were supposed to have, right? It's like a fat kid arguing about I didn't get enough to eat, you know. But the truth of the matter is, right? You get it all the time, right? And I think that's true for us as human beings. And I think that's particularly true for black kids who in the South who come from people, right, who just yesterday were in chains. You know, like growing up, did you have your own bedroom?
No.
I didn't either. And I was like, who in the hell has their own bedroom? I didn't know no black kids with their own bedroom and your own bed. And somebody had a TV? Did you have a TV in your room?
Yeah, I had a TV.
In your bedroom?
In my bedroom.
Like, who had that? There were eight people in the house, and there was one TV.
Yeah.
And it was in the living room. And if you wanted to watch TV, that's where you came to watch it. The notion that a kid had their own bedroom with their own TV, and they had 7 different pair of sneakers, like, you're in heaven. Right? So how do you live like that and complain? Right? And so I think some of this too is the ways in which black children have subconsciously used whiteness and white supremacy as the measure and the means, right, of what they should have and what their lives should be like, right? And what's deep is not knowing that when a black parent provides that, you practically have God. Because what they came from, right, would be so much less than that, right?
Yeah.
And so this, in many ways, this book is about Isaac not understanding the wealth and the weight of his inheritance.
Yeah. And I love it so much because, right, and where I open up, where it allows me to remember my life differently. And so I think about, say, my uncles who were tender with me, who gave me space to mess up, who, right, they fixing cars and I can just kind of sit beside them. But I saw them with different women every weekend. They always smelled like some cheap brand of whiskey. And part of what the text allows me to do is to think about, right, not only the structural reasons why that may occur, but to be able to understand these just full, fleshy human beings who right, can give us what they can in those moments and who have their faults. But those faults, right, don't intrinsically, right, we don't need to lean on to them just as our full analysis of who they are.
Absolutely. Listen, if America can keep Thomas Jefferson, and not just as a man, but a hero, Thomas Jefferson was a hero? Thomas Jefferson. Not George Jefferson, right? Thomas Jefferson is an American hero.
Yeah.
I mean, how did America do that? We all know who Thomas Jefferson was and what he did, right? I mean, George Washington was a hero. These heroes had my people enslaved. So if they get to be heroes, right? Our flawed people gotta be able to at least be applauded for trying. Right? Yeah.
And
now, Thomas Jefferson was a beautiful writer.
You just threw that in there. And on my first read, and I think, one, because of the moments between Isaac and his father are so tender, are so like, and you paint them so beautifully, that I think Isaac's mother, right, is really central to, I think, the narrative and the lesson that you're giving us. Because an important scene in the novel for me is when Isaac comes out to his mother.
Yes.
And so his mother was nurturing. She gave Isaac space to be colorful, to be beautiful, to engage in art. But when Isaac comes out to his mother, right, she's petrified.
Yes.
And then she calls Isaac's father and says, right, you handle this.
Yeah.
And Isaac's father is like, shh.
The hell I'm supposed to do.
Right? And yeah, can you talk a little bit about Isaac and his mother and how, right, these therapy sessions also allow him to remember his relationship with her also?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, kindness is not a lack of homophobia. Yeah. Right? You can be sweet and homophobic. Right? and his mother, I think, is that. But also, his mother's she's an alcoholic. But in Isaac's mind, he wants this sweet, kind, wonderful mother who always loved him and always held him up. So that's how he remembers it. And so really, this book is about the ways that we trick memory.
Yeah.
Right? And we make memory what we want it to be, what we need it to be, right? So that we can deal with people in ways that feel healthy for us, right? And so, have you ever had a friend and you had an experience, but you remember it two different ways? Mm-hmm. Like, oh my God, remember that time we went to Disney World and Uncle John and Aunt Laretha took, and you're like, wait a minute, Aunt Laretha didn't go?
Yeah.
Yeah, Aunt Laretha was in the car. Aunt Laretha didn't even go with us to Disney World. So like which one is true? Was she there or wasn't she? Mm-hmm. Right? The truth of the matter is the memory is rearranging it as per our emotional needs.
Yeah.
Right? So when people start using memory as truth and memory as fact, that's where we get into trouble. And what's tricky about this too is sometimes we remember the wounding wrong too. Mm. Right? It's not always true that it's not always true that the way we remember somebody hurting us is what happened or is how they hurt us. Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes I wasn't mature enough, right, to take that essence or to carry that accountability. Yeah. So I had to turn it into something painful in order that somebody else could be held responsible for this thing, right? Mm-hmm. And that was very tricky for me in this book because as Isaac is recalling things, it's like, wait a minute. No. That ain't, wait a minute. Yeah, dog. That couldn't have happened like that. And as he's discovering this along the way, what he's also discovering is these parents he has that really he made them up in his head. Yeah. Right? And I think we all do that. I think we've all done that in ways that we think protect us. But what's also true is sometimes that also dismantles other people's excellence. Mm-hmm. Right? Because this father, again, who paid for this piano, if your memory if you don't remember him as somebody, as you're saying, tender and loving, which Isaac did not, mm-hmm. then somewhere your memory lied to you. You wanted it to lie to you because you needed him to be mean all the time so that you could forever be the victim of his actions. And so Isaac had to get free. And part of Isaac's freedom is a therapist telling him, stop being the victim. And even if you were wounded, but the body heals itself. The body is a healing organ by design. Yeah. Which again made me so mad because I wanted Isaac to justifiably fight the man. You know what I mean? but I couldn't pull it off, man. I couldn't pull it off.
You know what? I'm gonna ask the craft question because I love the way you phrased that. Where I wanted Isaac to do this, but we can be like, shit, you the one who wrote the book. Why couldn't Isaac do it? But yeah, just about like craft, about how the characters, right, become their own beings. And yeah, how is that for you? Yeah,
I can never make a character do anything. And it just pisses me off. I just cannot tell you how mad it makes me. Because there are things I want them to say, there are ways I want them to act, there are ways I want them to treat people. And if it's not in their actual nature as characters, I can never make them do it. Yeah. Right? They tell me no, right? They tell me I got it wrong, right? Sometimes they'll just stop talking to me altogether. They just mad, and I'm like, dang, now I messed up the story, because sometimes things seem logical to me as a writer, yeah, but they're not sensible to the character, right? Yeah. And so I never get dominion, if you will, over the character. The only thing I can do is write what the character tells me, but I can never make them into what I want them to be.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because part of, and then this is where I had to like put on my academic brain, because like part of it is like a meta narrative in the book. So like Isaac is writing a novel within
a novel, right?
So I'm like, okay, is this the point? And Isaac in which the novel that Isaac's writing is essentially about his father in certain ways, right? And Isaac goes through this where essentially it's the book Isaac is writing is about two young boys who were enslaved, but they were sold off and separated from each other. And the oldest brother then is spending his life trying to get down to Louisiana to find his younger brother. Right. And his younger brother is essentially trying to live long enough or survive just long enough for his older brother to get there. And Isaac is saying, right, or when Isaac talks to his therapist and they say, well, I want them to find each other because I think Black people need stories where they win.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I like that line. I like that. I like that line. And the notion that, it's something wrong with a people if you write your own narratives and you always lose. Mm-hmm. Let me just. It's hot in this room, so we can't be conjuring no Holy Ghost in here, God, that's a deep thought. It just kind of hit me, right? You always lose in your own stories. Mm-hmm. What the hell is wrong with these people, right? And that's really what this narrator, what the ancestors are telling Isaac is, sir, if you're the writer, right, somehow you don't just construct a story, you also construct the people's excellence. Yeah. Right? Even in their flaws and even in their wounded places, right? Yeah. All heroes are flawed. That's really the beauty of a hero. But flawed doesn't mean you don't win, right? Mm-hmm. So the notion, I took that to mean like, we have to still be able to win while traumatized, right? Not after the trauma passes, right? We got to be able to win traumatized. You feel what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
That's a heavy mantle.
I do.
But I think we are heavy people.
Mm-hmm. Because for me, how I'm hearing it is the winning isn't necessarily about the outcome, right? But it's about that type of relationality we have with each other, right, in the midst of it all. Sure. And just thinking about winning, I think about this scene where Isaac, and I ran track in college, so I love this scene where Isaac challenges the boys on the track team. Right. And so what happens is, so Isaac doesn't really have like training, so he doesn't get out the blocks as quick as the other boys. And then so they get like a head start over Isaac. But by the time they finish the 100-meter dash, right, it's basically like a tie, like a blanket finish where you can't really tell who won. But in Isaac's mind, well, they started before me and I finished equal, so he won. And Isaac goes back home and he tells his father about, right, how he bested these athletes. But Isaac's father, right, wasn't...
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
He tells Daddy, I won. Uh-huh. And Jacob says, what'd you win? A race. Really? Yeah. Because when we came out the block, all of them were ahead of me. But by the time we got to the finish line, it was equal. So clearly I was running faster. Mm-hmm. Right? And Jacob says, you didn't win. And Isaac like, nigga, I won. Tell me I didn't win. Mm-hmm. Right? What he really wanted was his father's applause so badly, right? And Jacob's like, no, you didn't win. Mm-hmm. But the thing that killed me in this story is Jacob says, and anyway, how did you run? Woo! Man, what the hell does that mean? And of course, Isaac is frozen with shame, right? And Isaac is, and at that point, Isaac is prepared to fight the man. He's like, okay, stand up and say the hell what it is you trying to ask me. And he said, I already said it. How did you run? What do you mean, how did I run? And when you were reading that, what did you take that to mean?
Did you run like a girl?
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, and how's that even relevant if I won?
Right.
Because the truth of the matter is, patriarchy is more important in America, right? Even than whether or not you win. Yeah. Right? If you uphold masculinity, we're more proud of you than if you are excellent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well. Yeah. All right. Well, and then when Isaac gets to school and he asks his classmates, right? And I think like, just be honest with me, right? How did I run? And so I don't want to talk more about that scene. So whenever we read it,
but what a weight to put on a peer.
Yeah.
Like, be honest with me. How did I run? What?
And and this ain't got nothing to do with the book. This just me asking you just because I love it. How would lying or evading the truth, would that be all right in that moment? Or, because I felt like, right, part of what his peers trying to do was redirect Isaac's attention. But Isaac needed an answer to that question.
He did.
What?
That's why I think the lie wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
Because Isaac actually needed an answer to the question, right? Mm-hmm. And I think Isaac needed something else too. And that is, I think Isaac, it was a hard truth. But Isaac had to know, and Isaac absolutely had to discover that the problem in America is not homophobia. The problem is when you cannot perform masculinity. Mm-hmm. You can be gay, but you still got to look masculine. And if you can look masculine and be gay, you good. Mm-hmm. It's the sissiness that people hate, mm-hmm. right? So that if you're a sissy, but you ain't never had sex with nobody, we still have a problem, right? And what Isaac discovers is, it's the masculine performance that I'm missing.
Yeah.
Right? Not how excellent I am. His grades are always wonderful, right? And I think that's when he has the aha moment that that the prize of manhood, right, is what you look like, not your character. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh. And not to spin it too far from that point, because I think that point is like beautiful. I'm thinking about when Isaac goes to church, and I'm gonna misquote this, and like I'm embarrassed, right? It's your book, so you know I'm saying this line wrong. But when Isaac says something to the effect that if I could just keep the music, right, church would be cool, but I don't necessarily want like the sermon.
Sure.
And part of it has me thinking about. So I do research in South Carolina, and I was watching this woman. She has to be maybe 60 years old, and she was two-stepping, and it was so smooth. And I said something to the effect that, oh man, it looks like the beat is following her. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about it. In the church I grew up in, the beat actually did follow the people,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And I felt, Isaac, when it was something about the song,
yes.
right there, that the heaviness of patriarchy, the heaviness of white supremacy hadn't captured that in a way that it may have captured, right, the sermon. And
absolutely.
Yeah, just love it.
I was telling some folks earlier that I think what Isaac figures out, which I figured out too, is that Black people govern the choir, right? Black people govern the choir.
They won't let me join.
Right? Black people govern the music, right? We wrote the songs, right? Mm-hmm. The people play by ear, right? The music belonged to us, right? The theology was given to us, right? In other words, this is somebody else's book we read. This is somebody else's theology we're practicing. But the music was ours. Yeah. So that the music and the pulpit are often at odds. Right? There are things the pulpit will say that the music will not say.
Yeah.
It will. I used an example earlier that, often in the church, in the Christian church, they say there's only one way to get to heaven. You got to go through Jesus, blah, 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 right? Then the choir stands up and sings 12 gates to the city. Right? Because the music don't agree. Right? But there are a million such examples, right?
Yeah.
There are a million ways where we get, the choir will say Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. The music is not going to say that. Mm-hmm. Right? Because Adam and Steve are in the choir. Right? And you're not going to have a church if you put them out. See, this is deep, man. People figured this out. If you hate that so much, put them out.
Right.
Your church is over. Right? And not just because of the people, but because what most people sleep on is it is the music that's conjuring spirit.
Yeah.
And any smart Black pastor, you better have your choir right. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that's why Black people coming. Now we'll sit here and listen to you, but if that music is raggedy, we not coming. Right? Because, yeah, it's true. Because really, the music is getting us into heaven, right? The theology and the sermon is just making us aligned with white supremacy in certain kinds of ways, right? Right? Like, the Bible says things like, you don't really have to do anything to get into heaven. All you got to do is believe. Just believe in Jesus. Jesus accepts you, you get into heaven. The choir says, right, if you say you love Jesus, you ought to show some sign. Right? This notion of how you talking about you love God and hate your neighbor. That don't make no sense. That don't make no, Oh my God. You see what I'm saying?
I feel you.
Yeah,
I feel you. I feel you.
So Isaac gets very clear, right, that there's something dichotomous about this notion of black religion, right? And again, the reason we hold so hard to the music is because the Africanity, right, is in the melody, not so much the sermon, right? In fact, many times not the sermon at all.
Yeah. And are we doing Q&A? I'm not sure.
No, we just.
Oh, so we just.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So because I had a bunch more, but I was trying to be respectful. Okay. And so this isn't particular to the book, but it's around the book. But I heard you say this when you spoke about the book earlier in the year, and it was so fascinating because part what I'm thinking about now is one, right, how queerness, right, plays an important role within, right, black spiritual practices in the church in particular. And I also want to think about that in the context of our panel about community and family and history, where you said something to the effect about how when we are harmed by our family, we can kind of echo that harm through distancing ourselves or not believing that our family name, that our family spaces are for us anymore.
Right.
And you said something about, right, for the queer folks in the family, show up to the family reunion, be yourself. And the part that really captivated me was because you owe it to the young people so they can see you and have another adult to look up and be like. And that was important for me. And yes, I like to hear about that, about how community, right, doesn't necessarily mean that's the place where we all happy-go-lucky, but community is about like a type of commitment and about what does it mean to be in community when sometimes needs aren't going to be met or sometimes we might be harmed.
Right. One thing I've figured out is, in some ways, I don't even like terms like queer. I don't like terms. Some of these terms are really, because they don't define the way we as black people do interiority, the way we as black people do, relationality, that they don't really define. It's like just the black version of the way white communities speak of themselves, right? And so one of the things that has been distressing for me is the ways in which a lot of black, gay, and lesbian individuals accept the notion that they can be put out of a family, right? How do you put somebody out of their blood, right? That doesn't make sense to me, right? The notion that so-and-so isn't welcome here, right? As if, right, some one person owns familial space, right? And I know why, but there have been too many ways that I think black queer people have surrendered their blood, right, unto people who seemingly do not like the performance of their life essence. And I'm saying, take that shit back, right? It's the same thing we've done with race, right? It's like somebody in America telling me, you don't belong here, right? I built this whole motherfucker, excuse me, right? So I can leave it or I can stay, right? But I have the choice to do either, right? And I'm saying there are too many ways I think that gay and lesbian surrender, right? And give in. So that, people don't like me, so I'm not going to the church. People don't like me, right? What does that have to do with God? What does that have to do with God, right? Wear your heels and sit right on that front row and sit down, right? In other words, it's your clarity and your confidence that this thing belongs to you too, that this is part of your inheritance too, that keeps people from begging and arguing another human being to validate my existence, right? I think that's extremely important. And come in and sit down and imagine God queer like you. Why? Because we imagining God black. I can't hear nobody.
He is black.
Well, okay, then he can be queer too, right? I'm saying God can be then anything, right, that you are, or that you imagine. And the point is, take the power to do it, right? I've seen so many people say, well, you know, I don't really go to my folks for Thanksgiving and everything because I'm gay. What the hell that got to do with Thanksgiving? What's that have to do with anything? Well, they don't agree. Do you know how many things I don't agree with? What does agreeing have to do with anything? In other words, we give far, far, far too much power unto that, right? There are things all of us don't agree with concerning our parents. There's something they don't agree with, like that has nothing to do with anything, I think. But it has made a lot of people believe that they have no home, that they have no place, that they have no context. And I'm saying stand in power and take all of that back.
Yeah. Well, because I think that was really important. For Isaac, where this idea of having an estranged relationship with his father, but the thing that made Isaac was that he was a twin, was that he was his father's son.
Absolutely.
And exactly what you're suggesting, where Isaac has a claim to that name, to that heritage.
In fact, he's the only one left. That's right. If there's going to be a future, it's going to be through him, right? And I think that's so important. And I think that's so critical. It makes me think of folks like Byron Rustin, James Baldwin. And I think part of the issue with contemporary queer people also is we can't figure out the utility and the necessity of queerness. People think that being nice to somebody queer is an achievement, right? As opposed to, like, we're clear, okay, we need heteronormatives, right? Even on a basic level, right? So folks can reproduce and we can have children. That's fine. Why do we need, not why is it nice to have, why do we need somebody queer? Need. And I don't see any place where people are answering that question. Right? Why do we actually need queer people? When we answer that question, we'll see God face to face. Because we'll understand why God has created difference, right? It's not just because God didn't have nothing else to do, right? There's something the community lacks in the absence of queerness. I believe that absolutely fundamentally. It's like if you had James Baldwin in a community, right? We don't know why we need him. But see, what this shows is if we're not careful, people don't really love Baldwin. I'm not even sure they like him. People are enamored by James Baldwin's intelligence. That's true. In other words, if we're not careful, we love Baldwin's utility, not Baldwin's being. Right? Which is really insulting to Baldwin, right? So that if you're not brilliant, in other words, if you're not exceptional in some kind of way, right, your queerness is ineffectual. Right? So we're clapping for Baldwin because ain't nobody that smart. So, okay, Baldwin, you the man. Like, you know, what can we say? That is not something to applaud. Because really, I think this is one of the reasons that Baldwin found it difficult to find even love and a lover in the black community. Right? Because people had no admiration for James Baldwin. They had admiration for the performance of his intelligence.
Right, where it's almost to the effect of, right, because of Baldwin's brilliance, right, we can love Baldwin, right, despite the queerness. We're not even engaged. Like, it becomes almost irrelevant to my analysis.
That's exactly.
Without a different lens where it may have us turn our eye to how does queerness actually inform what we love about Baldwin?
In fact, you can't get Baldwin's intelligence without queerness. You cannot get that intelligence without queerness.
Right.
I believe that.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
I believe that. You cannot get that, right? So in a minute, what somebody's going to figure out is if you want that kind of brilliance to come again, you got to pray for a queer child to come. A regular kid cannot carry that. I don't hear nobody in this room. It's all right. And I realized, you know what? They made it hot in here so we could feel like we were from the South.
That's intentional.
Yeah, it was intentional. That's what we gonna say. I do think that's important though about Baldwin though, because like, no, I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody name their son James Baldwin. I know a Ellison, I know Langstons, right? I know Douglases. I know so many black kids named after black men, but the black boy named James Baldwin, I don't know that I've seen him yet. And that's telling you, we don't want James Baldwin. We want intelligence. We want that exceptional brilliance. We're trying to figure out how to get that, right, without having to wrestle with, right, the construction of his sexuality.
Yeah. And on that, can we give a round of applause to Dr. Daniel Black?
Thank y'all so much.